In a small, dusty village tucked deep in the heart of West Africa, there lived a boy named Obi. His family was poor, and the small thatched hut they lived in barely kept out the rain. They had no land to farm, no cattle to graze, and no wealth. What they did have was a fierce spirit, and Obi's courage was the most powerful thing in their home. Despite having little, Obi never backed down from a challenge. The village was ruled by a king named Zubori, whose heart was as cold as the stones in the kingdom's walls. King Zubori's rule was known far and wide for its cruelty. He demanded high taxes from his people, took their crops, and had no mercy for those who could not pay. He lived in luxury, while the villagers lived in constant suffering, always working harder to fill the king's coffers, always starving for a morsel of food. The people of the village had learned to accept their fate. They feared the king's soldiers, who roamed the streets collecting taxes and punishing those who dared to complain. They feared the king's wrath, which was swift and harsh. But Obi was different. He had always been a boy who spoke the truth, even when others were too afraid. He saw the pain in the eyes of the village people, and it hurt him deeply. He knew that something had to change. One afternoon, news spread through the village like wildfire. King Zubori was coming to collect the yearly tax. As always, the villagers feared the worst. The king's tax collectors were known to take everything, even the little bit of food the villagers managed to grow. Obi, who could not sit idly by while his people suffered, decided that it was time to do something no one else had the courage to do. "I will speak to the king," Obi said firmly one evening as he sat by the fire with his mother. His mother's face turned pale. "Obi, you cannot. The king is cruel and dangerous. If you speak against him, he will have you thrown into the dungeon. Do not go near him." But Obi was determined. "I cannot stand by and watch as my people suffer, mother. If I do not speak up now, when will anyone ever do it?" His mother grabbed his hand. "Obi, please, promise me you will be careful." But Obi shook his head. "I am not afraid. I will speak the truth." The next morning, as King Zubori's procession entered the village, Obi stood in the middle of the road, facing the king's grand carriage. The villagers gasped in fear and surprise. No one dared stand in the king's way, let alone challenge him. Obi was just a poor boy, but his heart was full of fire. The king's soldiers saw him and shouted for him to move. But Obi stood his ground, his face calm and determined. "Who is this boy?" the king's voice boomed from his carriage. "I am Obi," the boy replied boldly. "I have come to speak with you, King Zubori." The king raised an eyebrow, his eyes narrowing. "A poor boy. You think I will listen to the likes of you? I do not ask for your mercy, your majesty," Obi replied, standing tall. "I ask only for justice for my people." The king chuckled. "Justice? From a boy like you? What could you possibly know about justice?" "I know this," Obi said. "Your people are starving. They work day and night for you, yet they have nothing. You take everything from them. The people are afraid of you. Why do you do this? Why do you make their lives so hard?" King Zubori's face twisted with anger, but Obi did not falter. "I am a king, not a servant to the people," Zubori sneered. "I rule this kingdom by my will. The people are mine to command, not to pity." Obi shook his head. "You are wrong, your majesty. A king's true strength is not in what he takes, but in what he gives. A king who rules with fear and greed will only end up ruling over an empty kingdom. Your people are your strength, not your weakness. You take from them, but you give them nothing in return. If you do not change, you will lose everything." The king's eyes narrowed. "You speak of change, boy. What do you know of ruling a kingdom? What would you do if you were king?" Obi took a deep breath, his heart racing. "If I were king, I would listen to the people. I would reduce their taxes. I would give them back their land, their food, and their dignity. A true king is not someone who takes everything from his people. A true king is someone who gives them hope. King Zubari stared at Obi for a long moment, unsure of how to respond. His advisors murmured among themselves, clearly uncomfortable with this bold confrontation. Obi could see the doubt in their eyes, and for the first time, the king seemed uncertain. You think you know better than me? King Zubari said, his voice low and dangerous. You think a poor boy like you can teach me, the king, how to rule? Obi did not back down. I do not know better, Your Majesty. But I know the truth. The people are hungry, they are tired, and they are desperate. They do not want more gold or more land. They want hope. They want to believe that their king cares about them. For a long, tense moment, the king did not speak. The air was thick with silence, and Obi's heart pounded in his chest. He had never spoken so boldly to anyone before, let alone to a king. But his words were true, and he could not take them back. Finally, King Zubari spoke, his voice quieter now. And if I listen to you, boy, what will happen? Will the people love me? Maybe, Obi said. But they will respect you. A king who listens is a king worth following. The king stood up from his throne, and for the first time, there was no anger in his eyes, just uncertainty. He walked over to Obi, who stood there, waiting. The king's gaze softened, and for a brief moment, Obi saw a flicker of humanity in the king's eyes. Maybe I have been wrong, the king said slowly. Maybe I have ruled with fear for too long. Maybe the people deserve more than I have given them. The crowd outside the palace had been watching, and now, they held their breath. Was it possible that the king had actually listened to this poor boy? I will change, King Zubari said, turning to the people. From this day forward, I will reduce the taxes. I will return the land to the farmers. I will ensure that no one in this kingdom goes hungry again. The people stood in shock, and then, slowly, they began to cheer. They could hardly believe their ears. The king, the same king who had taken everything from them, was promising change. Obi looked at the king, his heart swelling with pride. Thank you, Your Majesty, he said quietly. King Zubari nodded, his face still serious. No, thank you, Obi. You have shown me what I could not see before. You have shown me the true strength of a king. As Obi left the palace, the villagers gathered around him, lifting him on their shoulders. They cheered for him, for his courage, for his fearlessness. Obi had changed the heart of the wicked king, and in doing so, he had saved his people. From that day forward, King Zubari ruled with fairness and wisdom. The people no longer feared him, instead, they respected him. The kingdom flourished, and the villagers had hope once again. And as for Obi, he became a legend, not because of his strength, but because of his courage to stand up for what was right, even when the odds seemed impossible. The lesson was clear, even the smallest voice can make the loudest change. And sometimes, it takes just one brave person to make a king see the truth.